If Ford is serious about saying she will show up and testify on Thursday, can Republicans give her that time?
Well, I think they ought to. I mean, the conditionality is a little odd to the extent that all these demands are being put around her appearance when one would assume she's had some time to prepare for this. What the president said, I think, as you pointed out, was unconscionable, that a 15-year-old some 36 years ago would make a phone call to the FBI if she felt that she had been sexually abused. That is beyond the pale. With respect to her appearing, it is curious about the way in which they're negotiating this. One would hope that she would just come forward, make her case, and deliver it in as clear and concise a manner as possible and get these facts on the table sooner rather than later. I do agree, though, however, she should be entitled to an investigation. Anita Hill got that much. She deserves the same.
Jess, what do you make of the conditions that Ford has put forth, especially around saying, now she's saying we don't need an investigation, but she wants more time. She wants more voices. You know, earlier this morning, Susan Del Percio said she wanted to ask Judge Kavanaugh a question. If he was a sitting judge and the case before him was simply a he said, she said, wouldn't he want more?
Right. Well, and obviously it's only a he said, she said because the Republicans are choosing to make it so. There is actually a witness to this alleged sexual assault, which honestly never happens in sexual assault cases. We used to have books, laws on the books in America that were designed to make it really difficult for women to credibly claim rape that required a third-party witness in order to bring it forward.
And
that's how rare it is.
This third-party witness, Mark Judge, is on Brett Kavanaugh's side. So what rationale would the Judiciary Committee have to not go with it?
Imagine being able to clear one of your best friend's names because you were in the room when something terrible happened and saying, you know what, I don't feel like doing it. I choose not to.
Right? Which raises more questions.
So great, you can show up and testify to that.
Absolutely.
It's a very curious move, and the only logical explanation is that you don't want to say it under oath because it's a really big deal if you lie under oath.
I realize how high the stakes are. We are in DEFCON 5, and there's tons of people talking, I would say more off camera than on, trying to get their head around these were teenagers. What exactly happened? If we start to say this is the bar, are we going to get people to want to run for office going forward? But it is serious, and we do need to hear them out. What if Brett Kavanaugh, and now it's too late, what if he had taken an approach where he said, I absolutely have no recollection of this. I don't believe nothing, but it was high school. It was a long time ago. We drank so much. I don't deny that this was this person's experience, but I'm so horribly sorry. And unlike a lot of Me Too accusers, he doesn't have a trail of she said, she said, she said, she said. How would that have been received?
It may have been received better, but the problem is that you have even the President of the United States sort of coming to his defense in the way that he is, which makes it substantially worse. And the fact that you have essentially the entire Republican Congress at a point where they're trying to rush this through because they don't believe her. They don't want to hear her side. And there's a bullying aspect to this. And just think about what Dr. Ford has done. The most basic of activities that a constituent can do. She went to her member of the Senate to actually get help and support back in July.
As well.
And back in July, did not want her name to come forward. And now she's put in a position where her life will change forever. And this is substantial. And it's saddening that Republicans don't take this seriously, because after Anita Hill in 1991, in the Year of the Woman in 1992, since then we've doubled the number of women in the House and in the Senate. So this is something at their peril. No. It's not enough, but to their peril, the Republicans are treating this like she's garbage.
Yeah.
And sad.
It's still. I mean, when I'm looking at video footage from Anita Hill and from this week, I'm not even sure. I'm like, wait a minute, the same guys, the same speech. I mean, it's
still
stunning.
all white men on the Republican side. There is no change between 1991 and 2018. If you look at the Republican side of the Senate Judiciary Committee, it was all white men then. It is all white men now. Some of them are exactly the same people.
Then, Ron, what do you make of this? Some Republicans are saying, let's have outside counsel ask the questions. Or earlier this week, I know Hugh Hewitt had the suggestion, maybe some staffers who are females should. For me, it is more insulting to say, I'm sorry, a grown civil man can't possibly ask in a respectful way questions? I mean, are his knuckles dragging so loudly on the floor that he can't conduct himself? That's insulting to him and to her, to them and to her.
But there's probably some truth to it. I mean, we've seen this in the past, that some of the elder senators cannot relate to an environment in which we find ourselves now and don't necessarily have any sympathy or empathy for this experience.
But Ron, to that exact point, it's not about the facts then. If they can't relate to the current environment,
Correct.
It begs the question,
Why
should
are they
these
there?
people be the elected leaders representing our nation?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, and they've lost touch, and you've seen this in so many different hearings.
And that has nothing to do with age.
No, it doesn't. But they've also, listen, when you've seen the technology hearings, you've seen Facebook and these others in front of these individuals.
I'll give you that.
And they're not up to speed, right? They don't know how technology works in some instances.
I'm pretty sure Trump knows how the Twitter works.
Charles Grassley said, he doesn't remember anything necessarily from 35 years ago. He was 50.
He was a senator.
One would hope that he would have some memory of that.
And what's also disturbing is that they seem to be rallying around Judge Kavanaugh and saying, oh, he was young, he was a teenager, he was 17. It doesn't matter. Let's just forgive him because that's just what boys do. Yet it was Donald Trump who called for the death penalty for teenagers.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
in
but
New York
hold
State
on.
about five.
There's two different things.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be boys will be boys. They were 17, but he could say, I made a really big mistake when I was 17.
Yeah, but you don't hold your hand over a girl's mouth if she's
No,
trying.
100%. 100%.
Normal boy behavior does not include turning the music up to drown out the screams of the woman you're trying to force yourself on. That is not normal 17-year-old behavior.
Absolutely.
And the bar has to be so high. We are talking about Supreme Court justices. Those have to be the people of the highest integrity in the country. If you think about what the Supreme Court has been responsible for, school integration, marriage equality, I mean, the biggest and best of America goes through the Supreme Court. If you tried to rape somebody, even at 17,
we don't know that he tried to rape anyone.
But
we do not know that.
If you did what he has been accused of doing, even at 17, that demonstrates a fundamental lack of integrity that he's required to be on the Supreme Court.
To that exact point, it's such a great point, but I think people are missing, this isn't just any position.
Right.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
Only 9 people sit on the Supreme Court for the rest of their lives. So while you could debate, did he have his hand over her mouth? Was she screaming? Is there not another judge with the principles that they're looking for who doesn't even have a debatable, was it a scream, was it a shout, was it a squeak? Come on now.
Well, absolutely. And again, I mean, I think from not that I could speak from a woman's perspective, but this particular vote, this particular Supreme Court justice, should he be passed, will be deciding potentially the fate of women's reproductive rights and a whole host of other issues that are germane to women. And so
it's literally about his judgment. We got to bring Kristen Welker back in. Kristen, we got some more news, huh?
We have a lot more news, Steph. In the past few minutes, President Trump tweeting yet again. You guys probably haven't had a chance to look at this because you've been engaged in that fascinating conversation. This is what President Trump is saying right now, Steph. Quote, I have no doubt that if the attack on Dr. Ford was as bad as she says, charges would have been immediately filed with local law enforcement authorities by either her or her loving parents. I ask that she bring those filings forward so that we can learn date, time, and place. So again, not directly attacking Dr. Ford, but certainly walking right up to the line of saying, why has it taken her so long to speak out? Something that a number of women, particularly those who have survived attacks of sexual assault or sexual harassment, would say just doesn't make sense given their experiences. Now, this comes also just moments.
Kristen, can we just for one second?
Go ahead.
Again, I cannot believe that we're categorizing that as he's going up to the line. Have things become so perverse that hasn't gone over the line? Remember the tan suit that got attacked?
Well, and I think what is critical, and you're right, we are dealing in distinctions here, Steph. You're absolutely right. Typically, we see this president, when he attacks someone, go after them by name, attack them vigorously, dig in. He hasn't done that yet. And I can tell you that his top advisor, Kellyanne Conway, one of the first people I really spoke with about this entire issue, has been among the first here at the White House to say Dr. Ford deserves to be heard. She stopped. She spoke with reporters just a few moments ago, and she was asked why the president largely, on the whole, frankly, up until last night and into today, has refrained from being combative when it comes to Dr. Ford. Take a listen to what she had to say.
There's no reason to attack her. The president is defending his nominee to the United States Supreme Court as a man of character, integrity, impeccable academic and judicial qualifications and judicial temperament that he knows him to be, same as the day he nominated. And by the way, this man's day job is he has served a dozen years on the second highest court in the land. We're missing that in all of the din of all this coverage, respectfully. And the president is defending his nominee, but that nominee needs to defend himself against what he says are uncategorically and unequivocally false allegations. He says he was not at the party. So that's why we have testimony in our great democracy. We hopefully will hear from them last week. The president doesn't need anybody to tell him.
But it seems like the White House is following your lead, because you were the one out first who said it first, that she deserves to be heard, and setting a tone for her not to be attacked.
Well, she should not be attacked, and she should be accommodated, but she is. And I think these conditions, I mean, I just heard a whole laundry list of them on CNN. Thanks for saying them. They're growing, it seems they're growing by the minute. I'm glad her attorneys decided to get off TV and talk to the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's a good idea. And prepare her for her testimony. But the truth is the truth. So he's willing to say it yesterday, today, tomorrow, this weekend, last weekend, certainly Monday next week. But any delay beyond that by senators who already said they were going to vote against him is politicizing the process. And it's not fair to Judge Kavanaugh, and it's probably not fair to Dr. Ford. It's also not fair to get so little coverage of all the vile language and death threats that are being thrown at Judge Kavanaugh's family. His young daughters, his wife don't deserve that. He doesn't deserve that. None of you deserve it. So we really need to tone down the temperature that way. We're not attacking her. A lot of people are attacking him and his family, and it's awful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kellyanne.
And you heard our colleague there, Jeff Bennett, asking some of those questions, Steph. She was also pressed on whether the White House would commit to that Thursday timeline. She was non-committal. But again, so much of the focus right now, particularly in the wake of that tweet I just read, has been focused on the president's rhetoric as it relates to this issue, Steph.
Ron and
If I may, and I can't tell you how angry the president's statement that was just read by Kristen makes me. I
actually could tell. You were exploding in your seat.
I have, in my circle of friends, some experiences where daughters have been not sexually abused necessarily, but inappropriately handled, if you will. The parents never found out until they were informed by a third party. Loving parents, that expression is horrid. It has nothing to do with whether or not a child who has just had an experience like this would, in fact, confide in her loving parents and then take it to the authorities. That happens rarely, if ever.
To that exact point, you can take Christine Ford out of this. But when you think about the President of the United States and his judgment, to simply say blankly, get on it, why haven't we heard from you? All of us know victims of any sort of sexual assault oftentimes are ashamed, embarrassed, don't want to get in trouble. I mean, all of it. And you wonder, how could the President of the United States of America not be aware of this?
Remember what the president said about his own accusers, the 17 women who accused President Trump of similar behavior. He said that they were too unattractive for him to have assaulted. So this man's bar is very, very low when it comes to dealing with women coming forward about allegations of sexual assault. But this is how he's going to lose Republican women.
Actually, you know what? Then if you're watching and it is just about aesthetics, if Mr. Trump wants to weigh in on Karen McDougal, I think everyone would say she's a pure hottie. She lying?
Well, listen, there's a point that you made earlier that really stands out to me. When you talk about the Supreme Court, think about Brown versus Board of Ed. That was a unanimous decision because the justices felt it was in the national interest for us to get this right. When you listen to the president make the remarks that he's making and the way in which he's trying to push this nomination through, that's what's ginning up all of what we're seeing in the electorate right now. Because the fear is that this court is going to be so divided, they're not going to get anything right, and we're going to lose rights as a result of it.
Okay, here's what I have on my mind. We keep talking about what poor Brett Kavanaugh's daughters are feeling, and I do feel sad for them.
Well, he should
I
have
feel
also
sad
brought
for
them to
Yes.
these hearings.
But even if they didn't go to the hearings,
Yeah. They're
they're
gonna
living
hear
this.
about it,
I feel horribly sad for Dr. Ford's family.
Sure, Yep. sure.
But if you're Brett Kavanaugh and you are truly innocent, what does the midterms mean to you? Why not say, scan the school, do an FBI investigation, clear my name, I wasn't there. My name, my honor, my legacy is far more important than an election. I get it. That's absolutely important to Chuck Grassley, to people who voted for President Trump. But this is Brett Kavanaugh's family, his name, his honor. Why wouldn't he want that?
Well, we do have this, and this is obvious, a hyper-partisan split in which the other side is just absolutely wrong no matter what. It doesn't matter what the terms are, doesn't matter what the conditions are, doesn't matter what the circumstances are.
Okay, but you're talking about political sides.
But that's all that's going on here.
Brett Kavanaugh is a human before he's a Republican. Christine Ford is a human. Politics for them should be secondary.
And it seems to be for her. But Brett Kavanaugh has come up as a Republican operative. He has been in these Republican circles, these very conservative circles, since he graduated college.
And she has a Democratic strategist advising her now.
Yes. I mean, the idea that she would go into this without anybody who had been involved in a hearing telling her what to expect seems like a bridge too far to ask a private citizen to do. But I think that, Kavanaugh is supposed to be what conservatives get for putting up with Trump. The Supreme Court is supposed to, this is what they get. Like, they're willing to put up with the tweets, they're willing to put up with the embarrassment, the lack of knowledge about issues foreign and domestic, but what they get in return is hyper-conservative partisan judges on the Supreme Court. That was the whole case during the campaign. So the idea that they might lose one, well, that just undercuts their whole reason for embarrassing the country and continuing to support somebody who's as terrible as he is.
Remember, Clarence Thomas actually did defend himself quite a bit during those hearings. Remember, he talked about high-tech lynching. If Brett Kavanaugh is the Republican operative that we think he is and that you say he is, he's probably saying, look, if the Republicans have my back, I don't need to say anything. And quite frankly, the Republicans and the President of the United States seem to have his back at all costs.
I get it. Even if they push him through, would you want to have a cloud over your name, your family for the rest of your life, especially if you're absolutely innocent?
We have a president who's living with multiple clouds over his name.
But he always, okay, but no, Ron, it's actually different. President Trump has had clouds over his name for his entire career. It doesn't bother him. Brett Kavanaugh truly has a stellar record. Why would he want this?
Well, it's impossible to answer. I mean, you can't. It's hard to get in the mind of someone who's in this position, right? And say, he may think that for the good of the country, his positions on these matters that are going to come before him supersede anything else, including his own past. And so that might be a motivating factor.
I'm sure every senator is telling him that.
Yeah.
Say no, stick it through.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.